Hey guys, it's Shaylin, and I'm here today with another episode of Recent Reads. This is the series where I just chat about the last 10 books that I read. I read a lot of books, and I like to take the time to talk about what I liked, what I didn't like, and anything I may have learned. As always, I like to say this is very subjective, especially the numerical rating aspect. I rate books on a combination of how much I enjoyed them and also my assessment of the craft, but even that is very subjective, and what I like in a book may be very different from what you like in a book, and that is totally okay. Just because I liked or didn't like a book doesn't invalidate people who felt differently. This is just my attempt to talk about why I felt the way I felt about the things that I read, not any kind of value judgment on these books. So I've actually never been more excited for Recent Reads. I feel like, I've read some good stuff. There've been a handful of really standout books, but I haven't been loving tons of books. And I kind of thought, I was like, you know what? What's in my heart? What do I just want to read right now? And the answer to that is I just want to read a bunch of sapphic fiction. That's really what I want. I just want to read sapphic books. So this is the sapphic lit edition. It's the vast majority of what I read in this video. So the first book that I read was a short story collection, Gods of Want by K-Ming Chang. K-Ming Chang is one of my favorite writers. I love her writing style. She writes such inventive prose and inventive surreal situations. I've always been a huge fan of her work. She just never misses. What's so cool about this collection is that, it's surreal, but it's less that the stories are surreal and more that the characters live in a surreal world. It's like there are surreal things happening all around them, but the core conflict of the stories are just personal moments. So it's really, really interesting. The conflicts and the emotions are not surreal. It's just very human situations against a backdrop of surrealness. It's really, really compelling. In many ways, these are less stories and more universes. In each story, we kind of examine all aspects of each character's tiny but explosively imaginative world. The longer pieces are all kind of structurally and conceptually very similar. It almost doesn't really matter because every single line is so imaginative and original that having a bit of a repetitive structure to the longer pieces didn't really affect my enjoyment of the book or the individual stories at all. Even though I would start reading the story and be like, oh yeah, this is structurally and conceptually similar to another story I've already read in the book, I didn't care. I was just as invested. The details in each little story are so original and so imaginative that you never get tired of it. It's almost every line in this book manages to provide this deeply inventive creative insight into how the pieces of the world fit together. Let me see if I can find an example. I tabbed a bunch of pages in this book. Pain outlives the body. I told him about phantom limbs, how a feeling can be attached to nothing, how memory is meat. This book is also really funny. I highlighted this passage that I think is just really funny. I asked my daughter how you even become a lesbian, and she says, first I have to reject the male gaze. So I tell her the story of my father, who couldn't see except for the shadows of things. She says, I'm not talking about literal sight, but I am. I'm talking about literally being seen. It's both tender and really funny. This is definitely one of my favorite short story collections. It's really, really knocked it to the park. I love K-Ming Chang's work and I really enjoyed Bestiary, but I think that her style shines even better in the short form. And it's just an unapologetically sapphic book. So then I read Violets by Kyung-Sook Shin, translated by Anton Her. So this book follows San, and in the first chapter, she's I think 8, and she has this very, very close relationship to this other girl named Name, and one day they share a kiss. And after this, Name completely rejects her and pushes her away. The rest of the book takes place in San's adulthood. She's living in Seoul. She's doing the most lesbian thing I've ever heard of in my life, which is get a job at a flower shop, befriend the cute girl who works in the flower shop, and immediately move in with her. This book follows her going throughout the world with this unspoken sense of who she is that is so repressed because of this rejection that she faced as a child. And it's very quiet and enigmatic, gentle, but also kind of brutal in a way. The writing is very clear and straightforward, but so much of what San feels is never said. It's we get a very close, intimate look into all her daily habits. She tells us in great detail what she eats and when she wakes up and all this detail of her life. There's so much about her that she will never say and that the story will never say, but we can sense it. That one chapter at the beginning from her childhood just illuminates the rest of the book. It's we can really see how this one event has shaped her. The goals that she has about reconciling with this, again, never really stated, but always felt, you know, this book, maybe, especially in the first half, it's very quiet on the surface with not much happening. And it gets more and more internally turbulent as the book goes on. Events start happening that really dredge up all this internal pain that she has repressed, and you kind of see this woman starting to like fall apart at the seams. So then I read Sirens and Muses by Antonia Angress. So this book follows 3 different students at this prestigious art school, as well as one artist who's like a visiting professor. And it's about their interpersonal relationships, what it means, and what kind of sacrifices it takes to make it as an artist. It's set against the backdrop of the Occupy Wall Street movement, so there are a lot of questions about like, why do we value art? Like, what gives art value, and who gets to decide what art is valuable and who succeeds and who is a real artist? While also asking these personal questions about, you know, how do we reconcile art with commerce within our own lives as artists? Even not as like a visual artist, as a creative person, I found really, really compelling. The writing here is like very classy, but like compulsively readable. There's a really interesting romance love triangle between these 3 students, Louisa, Katrina, and Preston. They have kind of like really interesting love triangle relationships happening. This prose is buttery. I breezed through this. I gotta say, I have so much respect for the author for how many art exhibits she had to come up with, because she says in like the author's note or the acknowledgements at the end that she's not an artist, and as someone who is working on a book where the main characters are artists, I have had to come up with so many art exhibits, and it's so hard coming up with art exhibits that like convince the reader that this person is a good artist when you are not an artist is so hard. But she came up with so many art exhibits, and I really bought it. I was actually surprised when I got to the end of the book and read that the author wasn't an artist herself. I fully bought it. This just kind of has it all. Artists, academia vibes. I love campus novels because as someone who peaked in university, just very, very fun, enjoyable, but like still really reflective and like intelligent book. Okay, so then we have a book that I'm so actually really excited to talk about, because I haven't heard a ton of people talking about this book, but I think it's like one of the most unique books I've read in a long time, and it's The Force of Such Beauty by Barbara Bourland. So the main character, Caroline, is an Olympic marathon runner, and she sets the world record for the women's marathon. And while training for the next Olympics, she has an injury and learns that she has a form of arthritis and that she has to stop her athletic career. While in recovery from a bunch of surgeries, she ends up meeting the prince of this small European micronation. What's it called again? I want to say Monaco, but that's a real place. But it's kind of like a Monaco-esque, like a Monaco, like Luxembourg. I cannot for the life of me remember what the name of this country is called. She meets the prince of this like fictional, it's not a fictional book, in the book it's real, and ends up marrying him and becoming the princess of this country. And in the first chapter, we see her trying to escape, but she gets recognized and brought back, and then we slowly work up to this point. It is just such a fascinating story. This is the plot, and I realized this halfway through. I'm like, wait a second, this is basically the plot of like The Christmas Prince and all those other like Netflix Hallmark movies where it's all about like some girl who has like a quirky job, and then she goes to, you know, a fictional European micronation that is like in the Alps, but like has a Spanish name, but like for some reason they're all British. This was actually good and nuanced, and I forget the country's name, but it had really, really interesting world building, and this book had such interesting things to say in regards to bodily autonomy in both athletics and also in monarchy. Like, she marries into the monarchy and essentially loses all control over her body. It also had really interesting things to say about the psychological effect of being the best ever at something. Such an interesting part of Caroline's character, and she's such a compelling, nuanced character. She was the fastest woman on earth. This is like her entire identity and sense of self is built around being the best at something. The lengths that she goes to in order to like replicate that high, and it's really amazingly compelling. Really continuing on my streak of good, but I read What We Do in the Dark by Michelle Hart. This is a really quick, spare novel about a college freshman who has an affair with a professor at her university. It's her first queer relationship, and it just follows the effects of this relationship on her throughout her early adulthood and how it shapes kind of her sense of self. The main character, her name's Mallory, feels very real, and she's in contrast with this other character who's only ever referred to as the woman. She's never really named. And it gives the woman this like otherworldly, it makes her feel so idealized in Mallory's mind. And then it's very slowly throughout the book that you see the cracks and kind of this character becomes more human. I thought this book captured the feelings of loneliness in a really impactful but subtle way. It's a very engrossing but like quick spare book, and I think it works because it knows just where to press. It knows the right time to press on the emotional notes to feel so real, and when to be very quick and very spare to keep the plot moving in a very light manner. I think it's a great example actually of a style that has a lot of telling but feels extremely nuanced, creates very, very real feeling characters. I think what I really enjoyed about this book is how on the surface it's a very like quiet, spare storyline, but you can feel this desire and also pain under the surface. It's like a very messy plot and very messy feelings captured in a really simple, haunting, and effective way. The style is so simple. Somehow the simple style doesn't reduce the complexity or messiness of the feelings in the book. So then I read Crimson by Niviaq Korneliussen, translated by Anna Halliger. This book is set in Greenland and follows 5 friends who are all queer, and we just follow kind of all of their relationships over primarily just one weekend, which is very transformative for all of them. This is a very energetically written, like propulsive story about this set of characters. They're all very interesting characters. I was interested in every single section. The only thing is, in most of the sections, it feels like the POV cuts off right as that character's storyline is getting most interesting. It's like it's ramping up to its most interesting point and then it ends and we cut to the next character. Some of the line level was a little melodramatic. I don't know if that's the translation or the original writing, but there were definitely some like pretty melodramatic lines that felt like they would be more at place in a YA voice, like the kind of thing where if I was 15 and reading it, I'd be like, oh my god, that's so deep. At 25, it just feels like a little too melodramatic and for my taste. One character's storyline is handled in like a bit of a weird way that just felt kind of unrealistic. But the other storylines, I think, quite interesting. I had mixed feelings on this. In one hand, it was quite unique structurally, and the form was really playful and interesting, and a cast of really interesting characters, a setting I've never read before. This is, I would say, like, kind of an unfair critique, and it didn't affect my rating. I do wish we gotten more detail and description about Greenland. I've never read something set in Greenland before, but obviously this is a translated work. It's not written for cultural outsiders, and it shouldn't be. It doesn't really need that detail for its intended audience. That's kind of a bit of a selfish, like, outsider perspective of me being like, I wish this had, been more about Greenland, but I think I just would have enjoyed more, like, visuals, but I tend to also just enjoy very visual writing. I kind of had mixed feelings on this, but I did enjoy it. So then I read Notes of a Crocodile, translated by Bonnie Hui. This is basically just about, like, the young gays of Taipei. We follow a university student who we never actually learn her real name, but she's nicknamed Lazi, and the circle of queer friends that she has, including this one character, Xiuling, who she's in love with, and we just follow these different developing relationships throughout her college years. And then there are also these sections that are about a crocodile that are, like a metaphor for how queer people are treated and viewed in Taiwan at the time. It's set in 1980s. I found the back jacket a little misleading. When I read the back of this, I was like, this sounds like the best thing I've ever read. The vibes I got from this were that this was just going to be like a bunch of chaotic queer youths being gay, doing crime. I don't think that's really how it reads. There's some very dense, compelling character work, relationship work that is very compelling to sink into and does not really give anything to you up front. It's a very nuanced experience of the queer experience. I would say there are layers upon layers of complexity. It's rare to find that in a way, a book that's about the complexity of being queer rather than trying to explain what it's like. There were so many great quotes throughout. It's super, super quotable. The book feels like it's almost entirely narrative summary. The very few times that we get dialogue, the dialogue isn't even characters having a conversation in the moment. It's characters summarizing events through dialogue. So it makes it really hard to, like, actually access these relationships, which are the most interesting part of the story, because there's so few actual immediate moments and so few full scenes. There's not much heat there, and it feels more abstract than needed. When I read the back jacket of this book, it sounds so chaotic and fun. Okay, I'm not gonna read the whole thing, but it says, Notes of a Crocodile is a coming-of-age story of queer misfits discovering love, friendship, and artistic affinity while hardly studying at Taiwan's most prestigious university. It's fun to have, like, a book that's, like, a campus novel that is, like, set up, that is, like, about students, and they just don't care about it at all. They're like, I really don't want to be here. I'm much more concerned with being gay than passing my classes. Like, honestly, so valid. Told through the eyes of an anonymous lesbian narrator nicknamed Lazzy. Afflicted by her fatalistic attraction to Shui Ling, an older woman, Lazzy turns for support to a circle of friends that includes a rich kid turned criminal and his troubled, self-destructive gay lover, as well as a bored, mischievous overachiever and her alluring slacker artist girlfriend. But those relationships, which sound so interesting, and you feel like you're gonna get, like, this really chaotic group of, you know, queer friends being gay, doing crime, blowing off school, you don't really get that. Like, it actually feels quite passive and slow in the way that it's written. But, I don't know, this is a cult classic for a reason, and if you really love queer literature, I'd still recommend reading it because I think it is a classic for a reason. And it's really quotable and it's really nuanced. If that is something that is like a vein of literature that you really enjoy, I'd still recommend it. I think I just like books that are really, really immediate, and this one feels very, like, far away from its events rather than close to them. So then I read some poetry, Girls That Never Die by Safia Elhillo. This is an incredible book of poetry that I love. It's about girlhood and shame and, you know, rebellion. I was tabbing so many poems that I was having to start tabbing with the bottom of the book because I was wanting to tab back-to-back poems. Maybe every poem lands on both an emotional, a thematic, and a sensory level. And so because each poem, like, really knocks it out of the park in so many different ways, it just makes the book really immersive and really powerful. I don't know, it's a book that shows a world that has been very violent to the speaker, but she's being very tender to herself. Powers of being tender to yourself in response to violence. This is amazing. I would recommend it if you were a poetry reader. Then I read Dogs of Summer by Andrea Abreu, translated by Julia Sanchez. This is set in the Canary Islands in Tenerife, and we follow an unnamed 10-year-old narrator and her best friend is Sora. It's just the summer that they're 10 years old and all the mischief that they get up to, and, you know, the main character has this, like, visceral attraction to a Sora that she's too young to really understand, but it is clearly there. The writing here is so onomatopoeic. Like, you know, I don't know if I've seen a style that relies on sound and rhythm more than literal meaning in the way that this one does, but it makes for a very unique reading experience, and I don't even know how the translator did that. When I think about the fact that this was translated and the style relies so much on sound more than, like, concrete meaning, I think to me this almost felt more like an extended short story. It gets to its point very early on and then kind of just keeps on going. Like, the writing is very visceral and it does an amazing job of capturing the way that time passes at that age. You know, everything feels like really sharp and tiny things feel meaningful, and you make meaning out of very small things, but at the same time every day kind of just blurs together. The emotional tone pretty much never shifts, which makes this feel like just like one never-ending episode, like single episode, even though it's many, many days. Very important things happen, and it doesn't change the emotional tone, and it doesn't even really impact the story. Trigger warning, but there's a sexual assault that happens that is never mentioned after the fact. Even though, yes, the main character is, like, too young to really understand what has just happened, this is still a, like, devastating, dramatic, life-changing event. It happens, and then the book just never, like, it changes nothing. This book kind of feels like perpetual status quo, because there were these few things that happened that, like, should have dramatically changed these characters' lives, and instead we were just stuck in status quo. I would have enjoyed it more if we were just stuck in status quo, because the status quo was quite atmospheric and fun to read about. There's really only one thing in the book that changes the status quo, and it's resolved quite quickly. I wanted to read one passage, though. Can you tell I've been tabbing my books? Because that's why I have all these passages to read. Two passages that are on actually, like, back-to-back pages, but that I think really perfectly capture the quality of the writing. So this first one is really short. I dreamed of healing Sora's sadness. I wanted to be her dog, and I wanted her to be my saint with scraped knees. It's a little more lyrical than a 10-year-old would be capable of, captures such a visceral, young sense of desire. And then there's this passage on the next page that I think does a beautiful job of capturing this young character and, you know, the type of thoughts you have at this age. Sometimes I wondered how she knew so much stuff I didn't know, and then I got sad because I didn't have a sadness of my own. My sadness was the same as Asora's, except inside my body. It was kind of like a fake sadness, like 2 copies of the same sadness, like a knockoff sadness. That was me. I had no real reason to be sad, so I just made one up. It's such a 10-year-old girl thing to think. The highlight quality of this book is this hazy, atmospheric, very poetic capturing of youth. I think that the way the events are handled is kind of weird. So the last book that I have to talk about is Briefly a Delicious Life by Nell Stevens. So this book follows Blanca, who is a ghost who lives in Mallorca, and she died there when she was 14, hundreds of years ago, and she's just been chilling around the island. At the beginning of the story, George Sand arrives with her 2 children and Frederick Chopin, however you say his last name. The composer arrives, and basically because he's dying of consumption and they're trying to like give him like, when people used to like go to the seaside as like a cure, and Blanca basically immediately falls in love with George. And so the story is both about Blanca's obsession and love for George, as well as this external storyline happening with George and Chopin and how like the villagers in Mallorca view them, and we also get flashbacks into Blanca's life. Blanca can kind of like inhabit people and see into their memories, and so she's able to give like a very almost omniscient view of the events. Now, the reason I picked this up is because this sounded very similar to my book, Holding a Ghost, so I had to read this to make sure it wasn't too similar, and luckily the plot is completely different, and the way the ghost is handled was very different. Ghosts are inherently sapphic, in my opinion, and this book gets that. This is like such a tactile sensory book. You feel and like taste and smell everything. It's such a tactile book. Blanca is such a unique narrator and such a unique lens on a story. Like, her perspective adds so much to this story. This story could have also been written in a more traditional way with George as the narrator, and we would get this like historical fiction book. Adding Blanca's storyline adds this entirely new fascinating dimension to the characters. She's such a fun narrator. She's a little cheeky, she's clever, she messes with people she doesn't like. I think it was probably hard to balance how many narratives there were happening. Like this narrative in the fictive present about George and her family, Blanca's relationship with George, Blanca's past and George's past. Like, I think it was probably hard to get all of those things moving, and I think it was hard to get all those narratives in balance in a way where they would all propel each other. So I think it got a little stalled in the middle, but this was like a very original, tender, sensory book. It's super buttery to read, and the story comes from a place that I've never seen before, but it didn't feel like a gimmick. It was such an integral and like illuminating aspect of the story. So that is all for this video of Sapphic book recs. Truly, I've been living my best life reading so much Sapphic lit, so if you have Sapphic lit to recommend, please tell me, because I would like to read some more of it. As always, I just want to hear what you guys have been reading lately, what you've been liking, or what you've maybe not been liking. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in another video.